So there's a war happening in Mexico that we need to talk about. And we need to know which side you're on. In the first corner, wearing red, white, and blue, is the proud American expat, speaking English, drinking Colombian coffee, and throwing parties every time a new Walmart opens. And in the other corner, wearing green, white, and red, we have the American immigrant, fluent in Spanish, never paying more than 5,000 pesos a month for an apartment, and making their own flour tortillas on a comal. Should the expats go back where they came from, or should the immigrants get over themselves? But first, breakfast. We're taking these to one of my favorite restaurants nearby and literally bringing my to-go plates. And yeah, probably going to overtip. Okay, while the restaurant is actually making my breakfast, today they are a little bit behind schedule, so they told me they would call me when it's ready. So obviously I was joking about the expat versus immigrant war that's going on here, but also kind of not joking. Definitely on Facebook and even in other YouTube channels, we can see this kind of constant battle of how to be a good immigrant or expat here in Mexico.
This video is for all the other Americans living in Mexico.
How quickly should we become fluent in Spanish? Do we need to pressure ourselves into becoming best friends with a local like in the first month? Do we need to become Mexican history experts? Or even more so, do we need to become experts in how Americans have historically treated Mexicans badly?
As an American in Mexico, there's something even more important you need to learn. And that's the history of US interventions in Mexico.
I mean, listen, history aside, there are some of us that still treat Mexicans poorly in the US. We absolutely tell Mexican immigrants, and not just Mexican immigrants, but like actual Mexican Americans, people who were born and raised in the US. We tell them things like, go back home, learn English, you don't belong here. Like,
Then why did you stay in Mexico?
This is my property and I'm in charge of...
property. You just think it's your property because you're Mexican.
Oh, really?
Mexicans are.
Okay.
They think they own America.
the vitriol and hate is a little aggressive. And so in traveling, becoming an expat, or choosing a particular country and becoming an immigrant, there's an element of leaving some of that craziness behind, and it's lovely. As much as I love America and being a US citizen, I mean, let's just face it, there's no such thing as a perfect country, and the US is no exception. We have our flaws just like everybody else, and even as an American, knowing how deep some of those crazy topics go, it's a lovely break to be able to travel the world and see something that's not inherently American. But there's this bizarre argument that happens that when an American, or possibly any citizen, leaves their home country and goes to a new location, that we have to assimilate. We have to live like a local or become a local. And the thing is, I could argue it's not even possible, much as we might have good intentions. Listen, I don't know why you're living in Mexico or why you're interested in moving to Mexico, but please know that Mexico, and this applies if you're trying to move to the US, the world is not just about becoming like everyone else. That should never be our goal. You're an amazing individual and you should hone in on that. This idea of telling each other how to be an expat, or how to be an immigrant, or how to be a great guest, you already know how. You already know how to be the best version of you. You don't need people telling you how to live your life. And again, Mexico is one of those places where just as a culture, they don't do that. So from one traveler to another traveler, from one human to another human, you probably already know how to be the best version of you, the best person you could be. Do that, whatever that might include. As for the expat versus immigrant kind of argument, if you're moving to a new country, yes, you're an immigrant. I am myself a temporary resident, and so to call me an immigrant I think is absolutely accurate and fine. I have used the word myself because I think nowadays the term is used as I'm a traveler, right? I'm an expat, I've left the US to travel the world. Usually, in this sense, an expat would not be associated with a particular new country, right? They might be in Mexico now, but they don't necessarily plan on being in Mexico forever. They're not against the idea of moving to another non-US country. And so that term gets used very loosely and gets tied in with a wealthy class of people, somebody who can choose to live wherever they want to is an expat, right? An immigrant, on the other hand, is somebody who moves to a very specific new country. So they're not a traveler per se, they're just moving to a very specific country and planning on living there. So again, if you have residency in Mexico, even if you don't necessarily intend to live here forever, we could argue that they are immigrants, right? They've moved to a very specific place and made very specific, decisions and actions to become some type of resident. that's an immigrant. Whether somebody uses the word immigrant or expat, at the end of, to me, who honestly cares? Now, while expats traditionally hop from country to country, there is a thing that happens to a certain percentage of expats where you fall in love with a country. And Mexico is certainly one of those countries that people fall in love with over and over again. And so while you might start off your travel life as an expat, coming to Mexico, you might fall in love and want to stay forever, thereby kind of transitioning from the expat mindset of always traveling and moving to bigger and better things to the immigrant lifestyle. And so this war begins. Should an expat who wants to become an immigrant change their way of life? Is it necessary to start hating Taco Bell just because you're in Mexico? Is it necessary to search for and only live in a home that the median Mexican might be able to afford? And even though Walmart, Starbucks, KFC, and other American or foreign businesses exist here, should you limit your shopping to just the tiendas and small restaurants around your home? No. Listen, when I go to a Walmart here in Mexico, I'm usually the only foreigner. So as far as I'm concerned, locals also shop at Walmart and Sam's Club, etc. If I find myself at a KFC, I'm also possibly the only foreigner there. Unless I'm in a more touristy part of my city, in which case, well, yeah, there's gonna be tourists there. Oh, but fun fact, in my city, tourists are not just from the US. We have many more tourists from other parts of Mexico coming here to San Cris than we'll ever see American tourists. Not to mention we get tourists from around the world. So when we say tourists, I mean, we're not just talking about Americans. So this war that we see between people who want to keep their American ways and people who want to immerse in the local culture is super confusing to me because I have Mexican friends. Here in the Chiapas, I have a Chiapanecan friend who hates the cohetes, who hates the fireworks. She hates how loud her city can get. Now, there's nothing she can ultimately do about it, but she still complains, and she has the right to complain. And I have another friend who teaches English, and he hates when people are late for appointments. Absolutely hates when somebody says, come over at 5, but at 5, they're not ready for you to actually come over. He hates that, and he's undeniably a local. So this idea of we have to change our preferences, we have to change our habits, we have to change everything about our lives, we have to change everything about ourselves just because we're in a new location it's really misinformed. Listen, should we always be improving ourselves? Absolutely yes. Tomorrow we should be a better person than we are today. But the goal is not to become like somebody else, right?
Hello, boring.
Hey, want a limo driver?
I'm just playing the part.
The goal is not to become the best expat according to popular opinion. The goal is not to become a humble immigrant according to popular opinion. Rather, the goal is to become the best version of you. And today, it might include learning Spanish.
Libro, libro, blanco, negro. El libro en blanco.
But it might also include going to Starbucks and having some me time. You are ultimately the best judge of what you need in your life, and it's not for me or anyone else to tell you
How to be a better guest in this country.
Yes, it's super fascinating to learn the laws, the customs, the histories, and to know the habits of the locals. I've been living in Mexico for 3 years, and it was not that long ago that I actually noticed that in addition to adding salsa to their tacos, they also add salt. Why did I not know this? Now, does this mean that I have to add salt to my tacos or I have to add salsa? No. Listen, tacos are good in so many different forms that you can have it any way you want. And if you are not a taco fan, there are many other options to choose from here in Mexico. When somebody moves to a new country, like moving to Mexico is an amazing experience. The food, the smell, the sounds, the remarkably kind and patient nature of Mexicans themselves is astounding to see. And while I don't tend to make videos highlighting the things about Mexico that I don't like, those things are equally astounding and interesting to learn about. But in a time where people are able to travel and see the world, I think it's a shame that in the US, there are some of us who demand that foreigners assimilate and become just like us. Because one, I don't even know what us is. There's so many different types of Americans that it's an impossible goal to demand anyone visiting to become like us. Like, which one of us are you gonna become like? And two, meeting new people is always interesting and almost always a great experience. Like, how weird would it be if whenever you traveled to a new location, if everywhere was just like us, and if we were just like everywhere else? The beauty of travel is not only that the traveler gets to meet an entire new world, but that the world gets to meet the traveler. So I want you to become any kind of expat or immigrant that you see fit. Like, you are the best judge of how you should be. Permission for you to be you, even if it's drastically different from however I live my life. And honestly, I'm saying this for purely selfish reasons. If the entire world suddenly became all one thing, what would be the point of travel? Just in time to edit the video?